Whether you're here, here, or at one of these, it doesn't matter. This can find you.
This audio recording was made possible by organizations working together for people, not profit.
The common name, Stingray, technically a cell site simulator. First developed for military use, it's made its way into local law enforcement. It can track a person down to the room they're in if they have their cell phone on them. Stingrays turn these into homing devices, and that's just the beginning.
This brand new piece of equipment comes into play. The video you're actually seeing on your screen right now, it's a demonstration of how that new X-ray system works. The new X-ray system, they kind of described it to us like a dentist X-ray, giving officers a real clear look into what's inside of the bag or the backpack or even the package that was left behind or forgotten.
It's my understanding that the software that a lot of these devices use is capable of capturing things like your text messages, the numbers you're calling and receiving calls from.
Now, the equipment is very, very expensive. TPD actually had to apply for a grant through the Department of Homeland Security. Even with that grant, once they got that money, they still had some leftover money to put up, and that's where the Southern Arizona Law Enforcement Foundation came in. They put up the rest of it, and now TPD has that X-ray system that they are using during U of A home football games again and U of A home basketball games.
With the Stingray, though, secrecy is part of the deal. Durham's contract with the device's manufacturer includes a strict non-disclosure clause, not just about the Stingray, but about the agreement itself and its subject matter.
It's a very useful tool that we use, not only for the bad guys, but for looking people that are lost, looking people that are going to commit suicide. Sometimes we have used them for children that's missing that have phones. And basically that's all I'm going to say about it.
Harrison told us Wade County has had a cell site simulator since 2008. He insists they're always within the law and always get a warrant first. But there's very little public documentation of those warrants or of the use of Stingrays in general here or in any of the cities in which we looked.
No, we don't like to talk about it. When a general goes in battle, he doesn't give out his battle plan.
They actually used it this past weekend, and that's when we got that demonstration.
It's called terahertz technology, and what it does in essence, everybody emits terahertz radiation, and what it does do is enable you to see someone, say, carrying a weapon. The problem is, so far, the device that's been developed is too big, and it doesn't have the range. You know what cell phones were like in 1986, they're like now. So we believe that the technology will only get better, and that would be a major breakthrough as far as finding weapons on the street.
He worked for Bloomberg. Now he's actually make $1 million a year, which is much more than everyone made. Another amazing here now, because he's an outstanding scientist, he said, Professor Zhang, I want to stay in the US to pursue my dream. And he applied green card. The day he submitted his application to get green card, the day he got green card, 23 days. That's a record. Most of people takes over a year to get green card. So what I learned from my student here now, why I share the story with you here now. We all know students are the best products of our faculty, right? As a faculty, what I'm proud of, not by number of papers, not by the patents we have, not by our own prize we got, it's by production of the best students we can have. I feel bad Jingo is not staying in science, but I'm happy actually we have a better people to help us to manage our wealth, to manage your money or our money. So now he is doing very well in the financial case. Now let's back to the story here now about imaging story here now. I have been working on terahertz for a number of years, one of the earlier people in this field. But until 2003, I suddenly realized the terahertz technology not only for curiosity, but can be used for real life. We lost the Space Shuttle Columbia. 7 astronauts was dead after the Space Shuttle returned back. So believe there was a defects here now. Defects between the space shuttle and also external fuel tank. So when the shuttle left here now, this part called thermal insulation, very big, very light, they hit on the shuttle's wing at the speed of the sun. So can cause a big hole. When the shuttle returns back to the Earth, the hot plasma into the shuttle kill all 7 astronauts. Then I was really asked, how can we use terahertz technology to find the defects or delamination for this material? So one of the earlier systems which we built, we have some physics students here now. We have a terahertz source we call GaN diode, and then we send out this terahertz wave, treat as optical beam, and focus into the sample, either in transmission or reflection geometry. Then we move the sample or we move the imaging system. Then we are able to rebuild the system. So these 2 small things, one is 9 pounds, one is 6 pounds, they are the device my PhD students built in the lab. Not very pretty because we are physics students, we're not engineering students. So, but we can build concept. We know how to build it. We don't know how to build it beautifully. So this system here can radiate terahertz wave and detect terahertz wave by using this boxes here.
It's able to penetrate through materials that are opaque at visible frequencies, such as polymer, such as ceramics, such as semiconductors. So we can see the structure in these materials. At the same time, we can study molecular interaction, which happens also at terahertz energies within these materials. We can use terahertz imaging to look at coating structures by exploiting the fact that we can generate a short pulse of terahertz radiation, which can penetrate into the material of interest and reveal detail of the structure inside this material.
Since I do both experiments and theory, and we're trying to push things as far as we can go, and to understand things in a very basic way, there's high motivation in that.
Our current wireless devices use gigahertz waves to send data through the air, but Dr. Grishkowski is researching the waves in the terahertz spectrum. Terahertz waves can carry more data and remain open and clear, unlike the overused and clogged gigahertz waves we use today.
On Wednesday, the FCC approved a measure to help expand the availability of internet on tribal lands. The FCC will reallocate and auction off a block of 2.5 gigahertz spectrum previously only reserved for educational TV. Native American tribes across the United States have very limited access, if any, to broadband. It's one part of what some people call the Great Digital Divide.
According to the U.S. Census Bureau, 53% of people living on tribal lands have access to high-speed internet, compared to 82% of households nationally. The new FCC measure will create a priority filing window for tribal nations to apply for internet spectrum before it's available to anyone else. That's with the wireless signal that today's networks are built on. It could eventually make way for 5G internet in those areas.
For too long, those in these communities have lacked meaningful access to modern communications. Native Americans should not be the last Americans with access to broadband.
I want to make sure that those committed to connecting tribal members in rural areas are given a strong opportunity to succeed.
While it may look like a normal hallway at Oklahoma State, it is home to the best lab for terahertz radiation in the world, making all of the difference in research.
See, now it's communication links in the atmosphere, but in the process we're making measurements over distances of 170 meters, and it turns out that our setup and sample chamber is, we're the best in the world. Laboratory facilities and capabilities control in many ways what can be done. I had no idea we could do this over such long distances. You know, our expedition sets out. We don't quite know what we're going to see. You know, we're trying to teach students to learn their whole life, but to enjoy it. Research, unfortunately, in many ways, you got to be first. We're not dominated by wanting to get rich or something like that. We're quite happy doing this.
The ability to monitor every aspect of our lives, seeing every moment in minute detail, is something out of Orwell's futuristic warning. It's being played out on our own borders, on the Tono Odom Reservation in Arizona, on the U.S.-Mexico border, and it's being carried out with Israeli technology that was honed on its own separation wall, and is being used by the Customs and Border Protection Agency. It's known by its acronym CPB, and it watches not just the border, but even our own American citizens. In an extensive study published by The Intercept, Will Parrish reveals how the Israeli company Elbit Systems developed technologies which were then procured by CPB to invade the privacy of the Tono Odom people themselves. Media outlets like PBS, ABC News, CBS, others often report on the Tono Odom Reservation as a weak point in the U.S.-Mexico border, where some of the focus seems to be on blaming members of the Tono Odom Nation for smuggling drugs into the United States. They do extensive reports and interview Customs and Border Protection people all the time, but rarely they bother to interview any of the people on the res themselves. And here's a rare interview in PBS with Francisco Valenzuela, who's a member of that nation.
I would compare the Border Patrol to the Gestapo.
Francisco Valenzuela is a member of the Tohono O'odham tribe and a rancher. He says he's been harassed repeatedly by Border Patrol agents.
Every time I come down here, I experience something.
Like what?
Well, literally being stopped and being searched and point the guns at you.
So you've had guns drawn at you?
Oh, yeah.
Now, Elbit Systems was selected for the contract because it boasts that its technology has been quote-unquote field tested in the occupied Gaza Strip and occupied West Bank and Palestine. Every device which is installed in the United States has been tested against Palestinians first. Moreover, Elbit Systems' business model is not just one of selling cameras or surveillance vehicles, such as drones. It also includes sending teams of Israeli former soldiers to install these devices, train local crews on how to use them, and maintain them over years. This means, it seems, that Israeli citizens are part of collecting data on American citizens without our consent. And we're joined by Will Parrish, an investigative journalist. His work has appeared in numerous publications, including The Intercept, The Guardian, The Nation, East Bay Express, Counterpunch, and many more. He reports regularly on indigenous struggles in this country for justice in the United States. His article, The Intercept, which was published on the 25th of August, is called The U.S. Border Patrol and an Israeli Military Contractor Are Putting a Native American Reservation Under Persistent Surveillance. And Will, welcome. Good to have you with us here on The Real News.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark.
Let's start with an understanding of how this surveillance really affects the lives of the people on that reservation, the Tono Odom people themselves, and a bit about who they are and what this is about. And proponents of surveillance often argue that if you have nothing to hide, then why would you mind being under constant surveillance? What could it hurt? But talk a bit about that and the res and what's significant about what's going on at this moment on that reservation.
Right, so the Tohono O'odham Reservation is a significant area of southern Arizona, and it also straddles the border essentially on either side of the Arizona border with the Mexican state of Sonora. It's the third largest reservation in the United States, and so there's people within the nation who live on the U.S. side. There's people within the nation who live on the Mexico side who have had their lives intensely disrupted over the past, especially 20 years or so, as the war on immigration has ramped up in the United States and the border has become increasingly militarized. There's been a huge surge in Border Patrol agents and personnel and equipment in the reservation, which has led to intensifying harassment and surveillance of people living there. So kind of the coup de grace of surveillance is the development of these integrated fixed towers that are going to literally be able to monitor every movement that people make within a 7.5 mile radius of each individual tower. There will be 10 towers. They're positioned for the most part, close to the border in fairly remote areas, but some are located right next to residential areas. So, basically anything that anyone is doing living in those areas is going to be captured by these integrated fixed towers, which pipe images and other data back to Border Patrol command centers in southern Arizona. And they have a back in time feature, sort of like a TiVo meets Google Earth kind of feature where, basically all the images and data are stored and can be pulled up across time, so that Border Patrol agents are able to monitor people's movements over time, which is essentially what persistent surveillance means. Is this ability to tunnel back in time, as they say.
So I want to explore a little bit about Elbit Systems and about the company that's providing the surveillance technology as an Israeli company. And so, what makes what happened here with Elbit different than other companies? So from what you wrote, they attempted to do this for several years beforehand, spent billions of dollars. It did not work. They brought Elbit in. So let's talk about the significance of this relationship between Elbit as an Israeli security company and the militarization of the border. And these things fit together in kind of a frightening way. Let me just stop there and let you jump into that one.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned in your intro, Elbit Systems markets their products as being field proven, quote unquote, on Palestinian people. And so, they have a lot of experience with these kinds of monitoring operations through having been a lead contractor on Israel's border and separation walls, in the Gaza Strip, West Bank, as well as on the northern border of Israel with Lebanon and Palestine, on its border with Egypt. Elbit Systems has been involved in all these projects, so they were able to bring that expertise to this project with Customs and Border Protection. And in 2014, Customs and Border Protection was looking for, an experienced contractor to run this kind of surveillance operation in the wake of a failed attempt by a U.S.-based military contractor, Boeing, to get a similar project up and running. It became a huge boondoggle. So Elbit was able to come in and say, hey, we've done this before. We are able to do this relatively inexpensively compared to other companies like Boeing, and they got the contract, and they've, based on the metrics and ways that Border Patrol is looking at this project, they've been very successful technologically in accomplishing what Border Patrol is looking for, and they're poised to expand further. And Elbit Systems is interesting because they have a division in the United States, and they do a lot of their sort of cutting edge research and technology development in the United States because they benefit from the United States military aid to Israel, which under a condition of the Obama administration's aid package to Israel, companies based in the United States have to receive that money. So Elbit Systems actually has an increasing operation in the United States that is tied to the use of U.S. military aid money that goes to Israel.
That's a really interesting synergistic relationship you're outlining. I think most people are not aware of that. All the billions we give to Israel in terms of for its defense, giving it to its military, is this reciprocal relationship. If you have to have a company in this country to take some of that aid money to develop systems for this country's surveillance systems and other things, and that's something that's been really rarely explored, other than what I've seen you try to what you're doing in this article.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think most people don't realize that this money that goes to Israel in the name of supposedly deterring terrorism in that part of the world is actually being used here in the United States to develop technologies that then place, in this case, people living on U.S. soil under surveillance. And so there's this entire this relationship is much more complicated than
very complicated, and as
people understand, it has a lot more direct impacts than people understand. For example, at Standing Rock, where the police in North Dakota were looking for more intense surveillance capabilities they turned to the Border Patrol's drones in order to enhance their surveillance of protesters at Standing Rock. And there's a couple other instances I named in the article.
You mentioned San Diego
I think it's an
as well.
understudied, kind of underreported aspect of what the Border Patrol does.
Right, you mentioned San Diego, where they want you to watch demonstrators who could be dangerous, and they used it there. And then you quote Meredith Mingledorf, who is the spokesperson for the agency itself, for the Border Patrol, saying Elbit technology is a force multiplier for them, which is really military jargon when you look at it and think about this huge force of 61,000 employees, $16 billion budget, and can think of itself in some ways as a military force. And I think that's something we don't think about as well. And let me just think about that, but let's look at this Jay Stanley quote you have in your article. Jay Stanley of the ACLU. Jay Stanley is the senior policy analyst with the ACLU's Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project. And he said in your article, quote, "The border is the natural place for the government to start using them, surveillance material, since there is much more public support to deploy these sorts of intrusive technologies there." And so, when you look at this stuff, they're getting involved in this because there's a real danger about how this technology is going to be used, where it can go. They're already expanding it. So talk a bit about that and the kind of things that you yourself want to question, given the work you just did.
Yeah, deploying the Integrated Fixed Tower project, for example, provides an opportunity for these technologies to be further refined and for through developing new forms of expertise and studying the technology, it becomes easier to use elsewhere. The cost comes down, more people become proficient at it. It also helps to normalize the use of this technology. Who could imagine 20 years ago the use of this kind of technology on U.S. domestic soil, as it were? But because of the sorts of political changes that have happened in our society in the last 20 years, this is happening, and there's not widespread outrage about it. It seems almost normal to many people that this would happen, right? So that one of the aspects of this story is that yes, there's this creeping, technological proto-fascist, kind of society being tested out in the borderlands, where everyone is potentially subject to surveillance at all times in incredibly intrusive ways. And it's sort of, if you look at it in a historical context, very fitting that this sort of technology is being used on a indigenous reservation where the people who predominantly live there are an indigenous population. Indigenous people in many cases have been the canaries in the coal mine of technologies that are later used more broadly in society. So that is something to be aware of in the case of this technology.